Welcome to Meet Your Mentor. I'm Jack Scott, your host and the Chief Operations Officer of the Mentor Project. For these next few minutes, I will be interviewing one of our world-class mentors. As you listen, you will gain insights into their individual lives as they share their personal journeys of their successes and failures. We will discuss some of the best and worst career advice they have ever received, and I will have them describe in their own words what it means to be a mentor. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Jack Scott, and I am so excited about our guest today. I have the pleasure of interviewing Andrea Rothman. She is a neuroscientist and a fiction writer. While working at Rockefeller University in New York, she was awarded 2 individual grants from NIH to study sense of smell. Her debut novel, The NDA of You and Me, was published by William Morrow HarperCollins in March of 2019. Andrea holds an MFA in creative writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and she lives with her husband and her 2 children in Long Island. I am so excited, Andrea, to have you on the show today. So many questions. But first, please tell me, how are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm so well. It is, it's an awesome time to be alive. So blessed to have just be where I'm at and what I'm doing in my life today. I know that you have a wealth of knowledge, and I really want to dive into more about who is Andrea, and I want to learn from your own words a little bit more about yourself, and maybe tell the listeners something that they might not find about you on LinkedIn or on your resume, and who you are and a little bit about your career.
Okay, so my novel is called The DNA of You and Me. The novel is basically the culmination of a lot of my knowledge throughout my science career. So I started out studying biology when I was really, really young. I was very interested in that field, and I was just always interested in answering questions and posing questions and answering them. And science kind of offered a way to do that, and to engage mentally in kind of problem solving and things that had to do with things that I could see that were right there before me, be it nature, be it the microscope, studying cells. And so I went through, I started as a microbiologist, specialized as a microbiologist, and then moved on slowly to neurons. And I became eventually a specialist in the sense of smell, which is fascinating. And I studied smell as a research scientist for like 6 years. I conducted experiments. We basically worked with mice, making genetic strains of mice, whereby we can modify genes and study how that affects the circuitry in the brain, and learn a lot about the sense of smell and the wiring in the brain, essentially, in a mouse, and extrapolate from that knowledge to humans. So that's kind of in a nutshell what my science career is about. And that's really very superficial, but it's kind of a resume.
When did you realize you wanted to go into this field? Because this is so different from my background, but I find it so fascinating. Was it a science class when you were in middle school? Or, when we go in there and we had to dissect I think I had to dissect a mouse and a snake. But when was that point in your life you were like, this is what I want to do?
I know. Okay, that's such an interesting question, because honestly, I hated dissections. I hated dissections. I hated frogs. I hated the lobster thing. I hated all the dissections, and it was really hard for me even to sacrifice a first mouse. That was one of the most painful, hardest things that I ever did. So what really got me into it is just curiosity. Just posing questions about the world, or how does this work, and how do we smell? I mean, how are we able to sense thousands upon thousands of odors out there? How does that work? What we see, is it what a dog sees? Is it what a fly sees? What world do we live in? How are we I mean, we take all of these things for granted, but the universe is very different for us than it is for other living creatures. And for me, that's kind of the fascinating stuff about biology.
I have to ask you this, being that you're an expert within your field and you have studied the sense of taste, smell.
Yeah.
And I was going to say with smell, that is tied into our taste. So if we lose our smell, is it true that we also lose our taste at the same time?
Yes. So that is a complex question because taste, basically we taste five things. We taste salt. The tongue has receptors in different areas for sugar, so sweet, for salty, for sour, for bitter, and for umami, which is kind of what you taste when you go to a Chinese restaurant. You have soy sauce, that meaty, rich amino acid flavor. That's umami. So these are the basic tastes. You don't lose this when you lose your sense of smell. You're still able to taste these things. What you do lose is the component that's called flavor. So take a strawberry. A strawberry is sweet, but it smells of strawberry. And when you have a strawberry and you eat it, so there's something called retronasal smell where you're chewing and eating the strawberry and you're also inhaling the flavor of the strawberry, which is very unique. So that's because of your sense of smell. And when you have a cold and you can't smell, you can eat a strawberry, but it's going to taste bland because you're basically tasting the sugary aspect. You're not tasting the flavor. You're not getting the smell. And it happens with many foods, with basically all the foods, like even your coffee. If you had a cold, you would not smell the coffee. You would just kind of taste the bitter and the sugar. So that pleasure you feel, it wouldn't be there. So yeah, the sense of smell is largely responsible for the pleasure we derive from food and from life in general.
It's so interesting.
Yeah.
Within your career field, I imagine it has to have its rewards. What has been something that has been the most rewarding with being in this career field?
The culmination of a project, when you've been, conducting so much research and spending so much time working 24/7, 60-hour weeks to do something, waking up really early, going to feed the cells. You're asking questions. You don't know if you'll ever find an answer. And fast forward 5 years, you have a paper, with all your answers, and some things that you thought were A are not A at all. They're Z. So that's also part of the fascinating aspect of all of this, that what you think was something is not, and it's more complex or it's different. So that's also really, really interesting. And that's probably one of the most rewarding things when you're about to write up that science paper. And it can take 5 years or 2 or 1, whatever. But for me, that was one of the more pleasurable things. And for other people, like my colleagues and other scientists, to benefit from that research and to read the paper and to reference the paper. So yeah, that's really cool.
That's amazing. I can imagine in your field, especially when you first join, you're going to be more in a mentee role, learning from other neuroscientists that have been doing what you've been doing for a substantial period of time. And you yourself are now more in a mentor role. And you're a mentor with us here at the Mentor Project. And we're so happy to have you on our team. In your words, what does it mean to you to be a mentor here at the Mentor Project, to be able to provide your skills, your training, your background, your leadership to the children that we train that are located around the world?
So it's a wonderful experience, and I'm so grateful that I'm part of this project. And it's also a humbling experience because the questions that I've been asked by some of the children that I go and I stand up and I talk for 40 minutes. And the questions that I'm asked are questions that are so simple, and yet questions I've never really thought about. So it's humbling in that way. And it's also transformative because you walk out of there and you just realize that, these kids, it's just amazing. You never thought that, somebody who doesn't have the kind of scientific training would pose these questions. They're so interesting. So it opens up a world for me, for the children, and that's probably one of the most rewarding things.
Have you ever been stumped by any of the children's questions that they've asked you? Has it more been you have the answer, but you've never thought about it at that level?
Yes, and both. I've been stumped, and also I have the answer, but it's too complex in my head to really explain it in a way that somebody would understand. So there's also that aspect of how to, but it's also just simple questions that just open up a new landscape for me of thinking in terms of how you think about science, about the sense of smell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So being that you're a mentor in the field that you're in, if you were sitting in front of a mentee right now and they were asking you questions about your field and they were eager to possibly go into it, maybe they're in high school, when we have some listeners in high school going to college right now, and they're not entirely sure, they're thinking about going into science. Could you provide them some insight? What would be some insight that you could provide them that would maybe help guide them into that, making that decision?
About going into science?
Mm-hmm. Or maybe in your similar career field or something like that. Yeah.
I think if you're curious about the world, really curious, I think science is a field for you. It's very rewarding in that sense. And I think that's what really keeps people going in science, because it's obviously it's not a money-making industry, and it's just the reward that you're going to get just from the hard work you put into it, and the collaboration and answering questions that are important, or that might not be so overtly important, but are going to have value in the future, like basic research that now may not seem so important. Even take the coronavirus, the proteins that are on the coat that latch onto human cells, they attach to other proteins in human cells. I mean, who studied that? That was basic research, and that's research carried out through decades. And that's how we know about it, because of people who studied very small, minute things and asked questions, and they were curious enough to put in the effort to study that. So you have to kind of have that mindset to go into science. That's what my advice. Think about the mindset you have and what you're prepared to put in or not. And, even I would say this, even if science is not something that you're interested to do for life, I think the discipline that you get from conducting a scientific project is invaluable, and it can help you for anything in any career you choose in the future. Because really, it teaches you how to think about a problem, how to solve it. It teaches you perseverance. So these are things that you can take on to any area, whether you do law or anything you do.
I love that. And that is such a good point. I personally moved into being in cyber threat intel. That's what I do for my full-time position. And as I was moving into that more full-time and moving into the corporate world, something that you had to learn to be in this field is the perseverance portion, because sometimes you're going after threat actors and you're doing analysis that could take years to complete, or 6 months, but it's never a quick win. And sometimes you never find attribution, and it's learning how to have that patience, and you nailed it. I think that is one of the biggest skills that kids need to have right now, is just understanding to be patient and trust the process. And I love that. You are absolutely a mentor in everything that you do within your field. And I can see it just talking to you right now, Andrea. And you've been with the Mentor Project since 2018. And I would like to ask you an even more challenging question. Sure. And that is, if you could summarize in one word what it is to be a mentor, what would that word be, and why did you pick that word?
It's a transformative experience. It's a transformative experience because for me as a mentor, every time I teach or I help somebody, it transforms me in a more positive way, and hopefully it also transforms the person who is benefiting from whatever knowledge they're learning or seek to learn. That's probably the word I would use.
Do you believe that when you are the mentor working with the mentee, that it is a two-way relationship within that, maybe within that transformation a little bit? Do you feel like you sometimes learn from your mentees on different ways to look at things?
Yes, definitely. Definitely.
I love that. Through your career, both professional within academia, just in general life, has there ever been a time that you can think of where you just had some bad advice given to you? And what did you do about it? Did it actually impact you in a positive or negative way? Or did you trust your gut and keep pushing forward? Can you think of a time?
Yeah, and this is actually interesting because it goes back to the question you asked me. So about kids not being sure whether they want to go into science or not. So when I was in high school, I wasn't a great student. I wasn't, my grades were an A+ or anything like that. Far from it. But I did love chemistry. I had this passion for chemistry somehow. And I think the director of the school, at some point, she said, well, maybe science isn't for you. You don't have to pursue science. Maybe you should pursue something else. And at the time I thought, so this is kind of good advice and bad advice, because it's good advice because it teaches you to be open-minded. I don't have to be stuck in this, oh yeah, I want to do this and there's nothing else. On the other hand, it's bad advice because nobody should be telling you what to do. So I would take, to make a long story short, my advice is take what everybody says with a grain of salt. Don't just listen to your own gut feeling, what you want to do. And, never take advice from just one person, even 10 people.
I love that. I love trust your gut. That's probably one of the most important things is, never, and know where the source of the advice is coming from. Like, where is that person?
Yeah, that's super important too. But even if it's the best source, even that, if people, nobody has the truth in their hands, definitely. So it's all up to you. And there's going to be a lot of trial and error. And that's part of science too.
That's so true. You're taking it from your perspective of being a scientist. I love that. So I want to ask you the opposite of that question now, which is, what was the best advice you received in your life and how did that impact you?
The same advice. The same advice. You know why? Because this woman, this director, she said, the director of the school, she said, well, maybe you're not made for science. Maybe there are other things. And it's true, there were other things, because at some point I did leave my career in science, and I really followed another passion that has been a long time passion of mine, which is writing and writing fiction. So that was also good advice. And it just stuck with me. Those words stuck with me for good or for bad, because they kind of defined really what I've done with my life. I was in science for 20 years and then I left science, and now I'm pursuing another career. So
fiction writing.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Can you share with us, what is a big goal that you have coming up in the next 1 to 2 years? Do you have a goal that you've been just really, really focused on trying to accomplish?
Yes, I'm writing my second book, and it is also science-based, just like my first book was science-based, and it has to do with the sense of smell also. And my goal is just to keep writing and see if I can make a book from this.
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's kind of my goal. Yeah.
That's beautiful. So Andrea, do you have a particular quote that you can, I love this question because I love the diversity that comes from this, but is there a particular quote that you have maybe carried throughout your life, or one as of recently that you've just really been leaning on? And what is that?
Well, there are so many quotes that I love, and I wrote them down in a little paper because I knew that was one of the quotes.
I love it.
So I would say, for the sake of science, I'm going to quote Louis Pasteur, the great microbiologist, the French microbiologist. Chance favors the prepared mind, and I'm sure you've heard of that. Everybody has heard of that, and that's so true. Chance does favor the prepared mind. So that's one. And then a recent one I looked up, which I loved, is one from Mae West. Says, so ready? I'm going to read it. You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough. So,
Yep, you're
isn't that
absolutely
cool?
right. No regrets is what that means. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Awesome. Well, we are coming up at the end of our time, Andrea, but before we hop off, I know that the listeners are going to want to reach out to you. And can you provide a way for them to be able to contact you, if that's LinkedIn or maybe your website?
So yeah, sure. In my website, there's a link for contact, and there's an email there at the end. So that's one. And my website is www.andrearothman.com. My Gmail is rothmaa@gmail.com. That's one of my emails. So rothmaa@gmail.com. And please feel free to email me with any questions you have.
That is amazing. So AndreaRothman.com. Andrea, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been great.
Thank you so much. I loved having this interview and a pleasure to speak with you.
Have a great one.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you to all our listeners and sponsors who have made this podcast possible. You can check out all our content by going to our website at mentorproject.org. We'd love for you to contact us to get more involved. See you next week when we talk with another one of our amazing mentors.